This is Kieran Warren with Living Legacies, and today I'm interviewing my mother, Reverend Bernice Warren, who is a Presbyterian minister and the pastor and executive director of Chester Eastside Inc., located in Chester, Pennsylvania. Thank you for agreeing to participate in our Living Legacies project. Please introduce yourself and tell us what is your role as a Presbyterian minister / executive director of Chester Eastside Inc.
And thank you for considering me. I am Bernice Warren. I am a Presbyterian minister in the city of Chester, Pennsylvania, and I serve as the pastor and executive director, as you have already said, of Chester Eastside Incorporated. My particular job is to oversee all of the programming here. We are faith-based. We have food and clothes, after-school tutoring. We have a parenting program. We have we support a peace camp, a regular summer camp, GED, and various programs in the city of Chester, as well as we do a lot of we participate in advocacy and social justice. And the issues of social justice that we are really adamant about is really peace in the city, and also pushing for educational justice.
And how long have you been in this position?
I came to this position in 1995.
And how long have you been an ordained minister?
I was ordained, I can't even count the years, but I was ordained in 1980.
And growing up in Chester, how did you determine that you wanted to be a Presbyterian minister, which is usually a male dominated field?
Well, I would say ministry is a male dominated field, not only Presbyterian. And sometimes I wonder that myself. But I think growing up in Chester, I had a sense of justice or injustice. Injustices outraged me, even as a young person growing up in Chester. I grew up during the Civil Rights era, and I can really vividly remember watching Dr. Martin Luther King down in, I think it was Selma, Alabama. The two names, Bull Connor and George Wallace, are written indelibly in my memory. They're stamped there. And as a young person, I remember watching the holes in the dogs, and I was really just horrified at that. I was totally horrified. Didn't know what to do with those feelings. I remember when Emmett Till, the young African American young boy who went to I think he went to Mississippi, I believe, or wherever he went down south to visit his uncle for the summer, and he was murdered. And there was a magazine, either Jet or Ebony, but the mother was so outrageous she wouldn't let the funeral parlor fix his body up. So his body was, a picture of his face was on either the Ebony or the Jet magazine. It went all over the country, really the world, horrified at that. The girls that were, the 5 little girls that were bombed in Alabama, I grew up through that, and I was really horrified. So I've had a sense of right and wrong and justice for a very long time. I was a person, even in school, if the person was being picked on, if they got bullied, I would jump in the middle of it. So there's something about injustice that really just disturbed me. And I got involved in the church early on. My mother, she had a quiet kind of a faith, but because we grew up in a housing project, she protected her children, and the only place we could go was the church. And so I got involved in church. I liked it for the social aspect. We sang on the choir and joined a youth group. So I want to say I was particularly religious, but I liked the idea of being involved in the choir and the youth group and so forth and so on. So I have been in church all my life, and I enjoyed it. I think when I got to college, when I went to college, I started questioning my faith. But by that time, we had two ministers who had come to town. One was the Reverend Johnny Monroe. The other was the Reverend Dr. Cal D. Jenkins. And they were ministers like I had never seen before. They wore afros and dashikis, and they started talking about politics and how the church really could make an impact on people's lives. So, because by the time I got to college, I was kind of disgusted about it. We were in the middle of the Vietnam War, and I just didn't know really. I wanted to get involved, but I didn't know where to put that energy. But then Reverend Jenkins and Reverend Monroe came to town talking about civil rights and how the church should be involved and so forth and so on. So that kind of piqued my interest. What does the church have to do with empowering people to help them make a change in the world? So when I came back from college, I got involved in the church again, and I was with those two ministers when they were. We got involved in building a black fire station in Chester, an all-black fire station in Chester. We were challenging the schools, and it became really very interesting to me to be involved in civil rights and justice, and then connecting it to the church, to see that the church has power. And traditionally, as you probably already know, the black church has been very instrumental in being involved in calling for justice. So I personally saw how the church could really help transform the community in which it was a part of. And I began to rethink Jesus, and I saw Jesus in a whole other way, that God was really a God of justice. Dr. King was a minister. Malcolm X was a minister. I began to connect the dots, and I really understood how the church could play a role in calling for justice, and I really understood that God had called us to do justice. And so my faith awakened, I would say, and I had a burning desire to come back and to really get involved in these justice issues and calling for justice, because I believe in a God of justice.
You mentioned growing up in a housing project.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe how your childhood was like, some of the joys and some injustices that you might have experienced personally?
Mm-hmm. Well, I grew up in the Benner Home housing project with a mother, a grandmother, and two sisters. And so we were all women in the household. Mother was very strong. I've been influenced by two very strong women in my life. I went to, I was really in an all-black neighborhood. All my schools were African American. Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, Dewey, Maine, and also, so the first time I actually went to school, I think, with non-white people was when I went to Chester High School. So that was kind of a shock for me, because my neighborhood was it was all black, but I was involved in the Upward Bound program also, and so that's where I got the experience of really mingling with people that were not of my my culture. But my childhood really wasn't bad. I think the challenge was being in a housing project and being growing up poor. I was a kid who had dreams and wanted to go places and see things. I loved to read. I can remember reading about young people traveling and so forth and so on. I watched television. I would see people living in big homes and going to the beach and things like that. It was something I didn't have, but my mother was adamant about making sure that her children had the best that we could, go places. So I got involved in the Upward Bound program. My two sisters they had beautiful voices. So while I was going to the Upward Bound program in Swarthmore during my summers, my two sisters went to voice lessons in Philadelphia, and they were, practicing their voice. So she was able to, and in addition to the church, she was able to get us outside of the house. So that was a real challenge for me, because I desired to, without any money, but I knew one day I was going to do this, to go places and to see things. So I think the first really important impact of traveling had on my life was when I was in the 12th grade through the church. I was in 12th grade, and I remember the pastor, Reverend Dr. Cal D. Jenkins, made an announcement one Sunday. There was a trip to Guatemala, in Central America, and he had asked somebody else from the church to go, a young person. For whatever reason, they decided not to go. So he made an announcement. Anybody's interested that want to go on this mission trip to Guatemala. I had never been on an airplane before. Probably couldn't even say Guatemala. Didn't know where it was. But all I knew was I wanted to go. So I raised my hand and I went to him and told him that I wanted to go to Guatemala. And so, of course, my mother had a fit, and she had to be talked into letting me go. I had, as I said, never been on a plane, never been really any place. So there I was in the 12th grade. I remember getting my stuff together, and I remember I didn't know anybody. And he even drove us to the airport because my mother was kicking and screaming all the way. She did not want me to go. I got on that airplane for the first time. I'd never been on a plane. I looked out. I saw the clouds. I thought I could touch the clouds from the window. Then I became horrified at myself. I remember I broke down and cried because I'm thinking, what did I just do? I don't know any of these people. It was a group, and they were wonderful people. I flew to Florida, and then we got together in Florida and went to Guatemala for 2 weeks. So the point I'm raising is this. When I got to Guatemala, first of all, there were only 2 African Americans on that whole trip. That was me and another young man. I don't even remember his name now. And the people there were just astounded. I had a big afro, and they wanted to touch my hair, and they kept saying Bonita like I was pretty, and I got all kinds of attention. But the curious thing was, I remember going into a bathroom, and there was a toilet tissue holder in the bathroom. And for some reason, my eye caught it. And on that toilet tissue holder was Scott Paper Company. This was written from Chester, Pennsylvania. I had no idea that Chester, what was being produced in Chester, would have been in Guatemala. So it was at that point where I began to realize how the world was connected. And then we went to hospitals and schools and visited communities. And I began to see poverty here in the United States, poverty in Guatemala, injustice here in the United States, injustice in Guatemala. So I think I really began to develop a worldview of things and how things were connected. So that kind of piqued my interest also in the church.
Now, you said that your mother didn't want you to go to Guatemala because she was fearful. It was something you had never done before. What was the reactions when you decided you were going to go into the seminary in Atlanta, and you were a young mother, unwed mother?
Well, when I first decided that I would go to seminary, again, I don't think that I was thinking about going into the ordained ministry. I was thinking about becoming a Christian educator, and that means developing programs, writing material for Sunday schools. So I thought that that's what I wanted to be. I went down to visit. Initially, I went to visit the seminary and got very excited and came back, and then I discovered that I was pregnant. I think at my wit's end because I had announced to the world that I was going to seminary. And I didn't know how to go back to tell the pastor that I couldn't go. I was really afraid, very afraid, because the church, everybody knew that I was going. But anyway, I went to tell the pastor, and right there the pastor called the dean of the seminary and told him that I could not come because I was pregnant. And the dean's reaction astounded him. He said, well, when will you come? So the church supported me during that time, and so 6 months later, after I delivered, 6 months later, I went to seminary. Of course, out of love and devotion, my family did not want me to go. They didn't think that I should go, that I had a daughter, that I shouldn't go. The church didn't want me to go. I was African American, so I'm in a mostly Caucasian denomination anyway. Being African American, it was very difficult. And I was, I had a baby, I had a child. So they did not want me to go. They weren't really supportive initially, I want to say. But of course, that pastor battled with them. And needless to say, I ended seminary.
And you became an ordained minister, and what was your path to coming back to Chester, Pennsylvania, where you were born and raised?
Well, I would say to you, it's not so much Chester. I think wherever my ministry would lead me would be in urban areas. So I have a call to do ministry in urban areas that are broken, such as Chester. My first call was Baltimore. And I worked in a broken community in Baltimore, where I did almost the same thing. I see where God started me off. I did food and clothing programs when I first, 25, 30 years ago. I was working, my job, as a matter of fact, was to be in the community. There was a pastor. I was an assistant pastor. My job was to work with the community. So I have always been active, and I feel a real call to do urban ministry. So the path, after I left Baltimore, I was in Wilmington, Delaware. I was in a community called Hilltop with the African Americans and Hispanic people, in a broken area again. And I've done work in the mental hospital in Delaware. And so now my call is to Chester. So whether it's Chester, Delaware, it could be Guatemala, it could be Haiti, anywhere where God's people are suffering, I believe that is my call.
And I understand that you broke a tradition in this area with your profession. Can you explain that?
Well, during the years that I entered ministry, it was still very difficult for women. And then I was African American, so I was the first African American female minister to be ordained in what we call the Philadelphia Presbytery. So that was number one. I am probably one of 20 first African American women to be ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA. I can't say I'm one of 10. We have done a study to try to find out who was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you count from 1 to 20, I am sure that I am one of the 21st African American women Presbyterian ministers to be ordained. But it hasn't been easy. When I left, well, as a matter of fact, well, even when I was going through ministry, because I had a child out of wedlock, I was working in a church. I was assigned as a student to work in a church, and I remember, first of all, the minister was very sexist. And then he asked me not to even tell people I had a daughter. I was told not to do that. So I challenged that, and of course I had to leave that church. So I've had to fight racism and sexism, and the fact that during those years, because I was a minister that had a daughter out of wedlock, I had to deal with all of that. So when I came to my first call, which was Knox Presbyterian Church in Baltimore, Maryland, the pastor was so supportive. I had no idea when I went for the interview that he did not tell the leaders of the church that I had a child. He wanted me, so he called me there, and I went through all the paperwork, and then when I had the interview, and I'm talking about myself, and I happened to mention my daughter, that's when I realized that somebody didn't know I had a daughter. So I was excused from the meeting, and I remember I could hear loud arguments. I was in a room. But anyway, when I came out, it was, I had the job, but the session was really split, probably only one over. It was like 12 members, was probably 7 to 6 or something like that.
Okay, so what would be, well, you've already discussed what your mission is, which is justice. Mm-hmm. What are some of the joys in your life currently? What brings you joy?
What brings me joy?
Yes.
What brings me joy? My family brings me joy. In terms of my job, I really love people. I am a people lover, as you probably know. And so when I'm working with people and helping people become empowered, that's empowering for me also. So what brings me joy is people. What brings me joy is my family. What brings me joy is friends. What brings me joy is traveling around the world. What brings me joy is my faith in God.
And you said traveling around the world. and you mentioned travel when you were a high schooler. Are these trips for business or pleasure? Are you working again on missions as you travel?
I think it's all of that, the above. I do mission trips now, as you know. I really became involved. Well, my call to mission was I didn't realize that, but now I know, even when I was in the 12th grade. But when I went to seminary, I have a very, very good friend, the Reverend Dr. Marcia Snelligan Haney, who is a missiologist. That is, she teaches world mission at the Intertheological Denominational Center in Atlanta, Georgia. She was the first person I know who became a missionary. She went to the Sudan. No, she went to Cameroon. That's where she went. And she came back. She stayed there 2 years. She came back. She was telling me about it. And then she got married and she went back. And so, she was very excited about it. And she told me that Africa was in her heart. And she began to talk about the need for more African Americans to become missionaries and to go to places where people of color were, because there were not a lot of us that were doing that. So I became very interested in that. And my first trip with her, I think, was, I don't remember, I've been to Cuba with her. Her goal was to take African Americans around the globe where we were taking the slaves. That piqued my interest. And so I started traveling with her to Cuba. I've been to Cuba. I have been to Jamaica. I've been to Brazil. I can't really remember all the places, but where African Americans were taking the slaves, we visited those places. So it was educational, as well as, well, it was educational mostly. But when I got to Haiti, I became very interested in the people, and primarily because of its culture and its history, where to the Toussaint Overture, who was a slave, led an uprising. So Haiti became the first independent nation in the world. They overthrew the slave holders. And that piqued my interest, because I've always been a history buff also. So that piqued my interest, and I really began, and I remember going to Haiti, and the people of Haiti called me white. They said, we're white people. They didn't know, not that there weren't black missionaries to Haiti, but where I was, apparently there weren't many black missionaries going. So in their mind, missionaries were white. Even though I am black, they said we were white. So of course, again, that piqued my interest, and Dr. Haney had already said, you need to be going places. So I felt really a particular call to the Haitian people. So of course I went back, and you've gone with me, really trying to connect, and I got involved in the building of a school, the hospital. So to answer your question, my mission trips are not just for fun, but it is to help empower the people there, and it's also twofold. It's also responding to what Dr. Haney said to me a long time ago. African Americans need to be involved in mission, and so I take other people to light that fire underneath them.
As a seasoned professional, and you've seen a lot, you've been through a lot, what words of wisdom do you give the younger generation, and where do you see your life progressing?
I think the words of wisdom that I would offer to a young person is really to find your passion and to live it out. I believe that God has created all of us for a particular reason. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to find out what the Creator wants us to do, and then to respond to it, and to live it out.
And what is a wish for your family? What do you wish for your family and yourself?
I think basically, for my family, I would wish peace, shalom, that is God's peace, we know that we'll be going through, the life is full of challenges and all, but my real hope and prayer for my family is that we would find that shalom, that peace, we say in the church, in the black tradition, that passes all understanding. That we would find our center, so that whatever happens around us, that our faith in God, the God of peace, would not be shaken, and that no matter what happens, that we would, because peace brings love and happiness. So I would wish shalom.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.